Hello, Global Theater. My name is Jerry Fielka. Today is January 25, 2023. Want to thank Rob Grant and his amazing podcast, I'm Probably Wrong About Everything. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here today with Peter Yates. Where in the heck are you calling in from, Peter?
From the great city of Culver City, which to the untrained eye is indistinguishable from the LA that surrounds it.
I love it. The first question is, what is the best thing for a human being?
To express the nature of being that particular species. So, an easy metaphor for this would be the conceit we have that when it's a windy day and we look up and we see a bird playing on the wind, we think, it's not really looking for food, it's not fighting, it's just enjoying being a bird. So the way that works for us is, when we're not actually trying to survive, like we've got the food and the shelter, the question becomes, what do we do? What
Yeah.
do we do with our spare time? And that defines your art, whether that's sitting on the couch watching TV or what it is. But what we want to do, in my opinion, is express what's unique about being a human being. And there's lots of ways to go about that.
Beautiful. What's your favorite form of information, how it comes into you?
Well, by looking, observing, walking, talking with people, a lot of reading, but I have a very high tolerance for chaff when it's reading. So I might read a newspaper, for example, online or paper. And if I get 5% over time out of that of what I really like or am interested in, that's good. That's enough. But that's true of most things. 95% of it is dismissible, ordinary, generic, maybe good, but the great stuff is a very small percentage. So I'm not that fussy. I read books, I read paper.
Yeah. Just to divert on reading, did you become a reader because your parents told you to? They did it as an example or on your own?
My parents were teach by osmosis types. They were pretty busy. The family trade was medicine and academia to some extent. So books were taken for granted. There were a lot of books around, but there was
Yeah.
never any particular guidance. It was just happenstance. Probably what did the spine of the book look like? Did it look good? I pull it out. So it wasn't really guided, but I had siblings too, and they helped. And some people do turn you on to stuff. I wish I were more that way. Professionally as a teacher, I do that, but some people just naturally say, "Hey, check this out." So
Yeah.
in music and in books, I'm indebted to people like that. They're not common, but they're
Yeah.
very useful. Yeah.
Why do you think humans collect or gather information?
Well, part of it is checking in for kinship with other people. Part of it is practical. Part of it is fun. The
Yeah.
kinship thing's big, though. Am I alone in this universe? Uh, and information, you know, I think that each person individually is much greater than their place or time. That's a happenstance of birth. Your local culture can't feed your full personality. So, as a classical musician, which I partly am, that's one of the reasons we play old music. It's not because we're necrophiliacs. It's because there's a part of current culture that is not serving our needs. And when we perform, the audience gets that. They may not have come to see that, but that's what they get. Same when
Yeah.
you visit other cultures, what they call appropriation today is
Yeah.
really important. You got
Yeah.
to go to other cultures to fill out your being. So that's another way. I mean, information gathering is partly to serve that.
Really well put, Peter. Thank you so much. And do you think this need or want to collect information is more innate or more invented?
Well, it is somewhat culturally determined, the style of it. I read an article, it wasn't supposed to be about this, but it was really touched me in a long-term way. It was about an interview with a Parisian hotelier. I don't know how they got on the topic, but the journalist said, "Hey, you run a hotel in Paris. Everybody's coming through. Do you see any differences in the national types that come in?" And the guy said, "Sure, the Germans, they want everything clean, everything clean." And he said, "The Brazilians, they're easily tactile and looking for a poetic experience." And then the journalist said, "Well, what about Americans?" And he said, "Oh, they want luxury and Wi-Fi." So, you know, I thought, man, I play a lot of Brazilian music and meet those people, and yeah, there is something there. And you go to other countries, and you're a poet, great. So, it is culturally determined in some way.
Yeah, you anticipate a question that's coming up later. I appreciate that. Do thoughts create emotions?
Well, this whole divide between emotions and intellect is pernicious and popular, and completely wrongheaded. So, music we're attracted to, especially as practitioners, because it integrates everything, every part of our being. And what we're looking for, which is so rare, is when it's all happening together. Your
Yeah.
intellect, your emotions, your body, your spirit, everything together. It's very integrative. And the idea that one or the other is going to be better or in a way is deeply false. I sometimes think about like two legs. So if you had to choose, you want intuition, you want feeling, because without that, you don't have anything. But it'll only take you so far. Then the intellect can stop and say, well, what am I doing? And it can look around and see where you are and suggest another thing. And then your intuition and your feelings can take over again and take you another step. And then so far with alternation, you get to go places you never would go with just one of them.
Dude, thanks for being so articulate. I really feel I'm getting what you're saying. I appreciate that. But it is a stupid question, and I know it's both, and it depends. Your observations of humans in general, are we more thinking beings or more feeling beings?
Well, I think people sort themselves out on a continuum.
Yeah.
The problems come when people relate to me usually as though I'm an intellectual type, and I am more than most people. Like if this is the continuum, I might be like way over here or something like that. But to think that that means I don't have emotions is, I've learned in my life, not the case.
Yeah.
Uh, and vice versa. So the people have certain ways they appear, hard on their sleeve, like my son. People love him. I wish I were that way. You know,
Yeah.
they just love him. When I talk to someone on the phone, they think I hate them. It's just a handicap. But we just have to be open to the idea that the way someone appears, their flavor, they only have a certain amount of control over that. I mean, people
Yeah.
are temperamentally present the way they're born in some ways. But don't forget, there's that whole other side of them.
Yeah. We invented the words feeling and thinking. So, 80%, 90% of people go, we're more feeling beings. But we think because we invented the words, we could separate them, but they're like this. So that was good. Fill in the blank, Peter. I don't know what I think until I,
Well, I'd like to say feel, but also question, doubt,
yeah,
and assume that the one who can lead me most astray might be myself.
yeah,
And the other thing is, reminds me of, I often think about the difference between being opinionated and having an opinion.
yeah,
Now, being opinionated means you think you're right. Having
yeah,
an opinion means you're looking for a better one.
yeah.
And for this reason, when people argue, they have the wrong idea. When you're arguing, you should hope to lose
Yes.
because then you learn something and you got a better thing, So that people got it wrong.
That is good. Yeah, it reminds me, they said when presidential debates, you should you tell what the opponent's best features are. You don't
Yeah,
try to say they're wrong. You say, well, this person is
yeah,
um yeah, because McLuhan says, I don't know what I think until I say it. Joan Didion says, I don't know what I think until I write it.
yeah.
Can humans think without language?
Well, I think animals, other animals, I don't want to say animals because we are animals too. Other animals do a lot of thinking, I think.
Yeah.
It's a continuum, but you can look at them and say, and particularly, people say, well, we're not like the animals, but the animals look at us and they understand the kinship,
Yeah.
right? So, yeah, I think that we can think without language. But obviously, it's like what I said about feeling and thought. I mean, language is huge in terms of putting something in place and then moving from there and looking at it from different angles and stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, it holds still in a way, I guess.
I missed the beginning. They hold still, or what holds still?
Well, the thought,
The
you know,
thought holds
yeah,
still.
by
Yeah.
putting it into language, especially, of course, writing it down. But even if you
Yeah.
just speak it,
Yeah.
you it's heard and listened to, and you get other perspectives on it.
Yeah.
Whereas, with the other animals, we'll never know exactly what's on their mind. At least with us, we say something and we think we know what's on their mind. It's
Yeah.
approximate, but it's different.
Yeah. Chomsky says a language is not just words. It's a culture, a tradition, a unification of community, a whole history that creates what a community is. Peter, what do you do when language doesn't work, when language breaks down?
Well, first of all, I questioned that because it's easy to say, well, words cannot express. So what you're asking is really a deep question, which is, okay, can there be a thought if we have language that language can't express, which is
Yeah.
different? Yeah. Um, and I suppose again, it would be a continuum. In at the nth degree, I'm sure there's going to be something ineffable that we can't describe. But the fun is in trying to do that. I wouldn't give up. I would say I would challenge myself to say, okay, Noam, what is your thought that you can't describe? I suppose mathematicians have this problem. A lot of them talk about having a sense of something that
Yeah.
they're pursuing, and eventually they get the equation. So it is, some of it is futile, but a lot of it isn't. Years later, they've come up with the formula. Their brain's been working on it the whole time. That's about as out there as you get.
Yeah. Two questions from Alan Turing, 1950s. Is thinking a function of the soul?
Well, Turing was a very interesting and tragic figure, as well as being brilliant. Is thinking, what was the exact construction? Thinking a function of the soul, or what?
Is thinking a function of the soul?
Um, this idea of a soul is useful, but marshy. It means different things to different people. But um, my wife has been listening to some and working with a woman named Amy Johnson, who's, a person trying to help people not be victims of their thoughts. Well, that's interesting. So she talks in a very clear way about a division between the self, this creature that resides, I suppose, somewhere behind our eyes. We're not sure where, and our thoughts.
Yeah.
So that sounds like what Turing might be talking about, that there is this sense of self that can be betrayed by your thoughts.
Yeah.
Um, and so they're not the same. That's all I could think of to say about that. Whether,
That's good. Yeah, no, that's good. I like it. Yeah, well, I'm in a young reading group, and man, it's hard to get it, but man, that felt like it was something we talk about.
yeah.
This self and ego and all that. The second Turing is, can machines think?
Well, you know, Elon Musk thinks we're going to go to Mars and live there. Really, we couldn't even go in the desert and live very easily. But the idea that these machines are anywhere close to being able to self-drive. I mean, well, we have self-driving cars because everybody's on their cell phone. But aside from that, um, oh, these things are in their infancy, and we don't really want them to think, but people
Yeah.
think we want them to think, and they're putting billions into it. It's like it's a nightmare of Orwellian proportions.
Yeah.
Um, but we're nowhere near it. The complexities involved. These people lack imagination when it comes to how things can fail
Yeah.
and what it means to really. I mean, it's not their fault. They're up against millions of years of evolutionary design. And we're asking these engineers, or they're asking themselves, oh, well, in a few decades, we're going to have this figured out. You know, these machines are clearly going to be better than us. Yeah, yeah, dude, go for it.
Yeah.
No,
Do you, oh, go ahead.
it's a simulation.
Yeah. Do you more pursue happiness or more pursue meaning?
Well, happiness is, it comes from the word chance, happenstance, luck. Um, and the pursuit of happiness in the whatever that is, the preamble, doesn't mean la di da happy days. It means engagement in a life that does progress toward meaning. So I think they're connected.
Yeah.
Um, and what we think happiness means can't be the same when we're a young person as when we're an old person. Um, isn't necessarily different. We're in a different position. There's nothing wrong with that. Happiness has to do with that engagement in what it means to be a human being that I mentioned. Um, there is a purpose to being a human being, and um, but it has many valences. For example, when you're alone, what does it feel like to be happy? When you're engaged in your projects, that's a state of being that's very good. But then there's other people and dealing with them, which is much more complicated.
Yeah.
And I would say that, I've been thinking about people who suffer in love. It's a big problem. But compared to people who never had a lover,
Yeah.
then you understand that the happiness comes in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
It's much better to have loved and lost.
That's it. Yeah. Viktor Frankl says man's search for meaning, that happiness is more fleeting. Meaning can last longer, maybe something like that. But the next
Right.
question,
That
go
would
ahead.
be that would be the contemporary meaning of happiness versus the old meaning of happiness.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
Let's see. Does the brain more detect consciousness or create consciousness? Like, is consciousness there bubbling away and we're detecting it, or are we creating it?
I don't, I have a grandson. He's 3. And the amount of stuff that a kid like that, well, this is anybody who has a kid like that, or when you're a grandson, when you're a grandfather, you're at a degree of remove where you can marvel at this process.
Yeah.
The amount of inborn stuff is so frightening to observe. Just what these creatures come out in a way, what we say programmed, is that right word? I don't know, but to pick up on. Like by
Yeah.
age 2, they're telling jokes and they're trying to deceive you. It doesn't seem like learned behavior. It seems like something that is part of what has evolved, and it is spooky as hell. But so I don't think it's just something we learn or pick up on or observe.
Yeah.
It's something deep in the how could the program be that complicated? I mean, it's just a bunch of DNA. I don't get it. There are
Good.
Mhm.
What's very good? What's faster, speed of light or speed of thought?
Light is, I think thoughts have a limit, and it's a little hard to tell because they're mediated by muscles. I mean, we have to talk or write or move our fingers to play an instrument, and that's measurable. I mean, it takes about a 40th of a second. I forget if it's just to go from here to your fingertip, or is it there and back? It doesn't matter. A 40th of a second is a pretty long time. So nowhere near the speed of light.
Audre Lorde, the poet, says, you can't dismantle the master's house using the master's tools. Yvonne Rainer responded, said, you can if you expose the tools. What new tool do you suggest?
Well, it's this master-slave relationship is interesting, you know. We're talking about a power equation, and to the extent that one can, and these days it's fashionable to talk about privilege, and that's a good thing, but it's not nearly finely parsed enough. Everybody is on different totem poles simultaneously, and some people above them and below them in various different ways. And all you have to do is change the pole, and you realize, oh, the person who was below me is now above me. But there are all these power equations, and the what I've found is that in any of them, there's usually a degree of wiggle room. You're not as completely imprisoned as you think. Now, prisoners have often talked about this. If they're at all, thoughtful, they'll say, yeah, well, they can't control my mind, things like that. So if each of us has some ability, some wiggle room to do stuff under the radar. Now, in some countries, in some places, it's very little, and that worries me greatly. In our country, the way you're supposed to be, social mores, government limits, whatever, does control a lot of what we do. But realistically, compared to the scope of human history, I've been able to live my life avoiding power as much as possible. I don't like power. I've never liked it. I've never liked games where somebody wins and somebody loses. So I've lived my whole life avoiding it as much as possible. It has been very difficult in some places. It's caused problems for people because they like it. I don't. But I think of under the radar a lot. I think of it as an invitation to people. Now, this has nothing to do with getting rid of the master, but it does have to do with not being crushed by them and not being kept from what you want to do or what fulfills you or how you want to live your life.
Yeah,
So that's as close as I can come to that.
that's beautiful. That was an inspiration to me. I needed to hear that, Peter. Beautiful. So, what new toy do you suggest?
Um, well, the word toy is also a verb.
Yep.
And so it almost doesn't matter what it is, we toy with it. I don't mean that like I'm toying with you, like to
Yeah.
mess with your mind. I mean, playing with things.
Yeah.
Playing is, Nietzsche said that the purpose of maturation, adult maturation, is to rediscover the seriousness of childhood play. Um, and I think about that, because that play is a very interesting word. It has lots of meanings. It has to do with wiggle room, as I mentioned. Um, but that idea is, so whatever you're using um, should be toyed with. Sometimes the machines that we have as tools feel as if they're controlling us rather than us toying with them. That's true of a lot of digital crapola. We're serving the machine in ways we don't even realize. So in some ways, the simpler the better.
Yeah. Beautiful. Zappa said, I'm very serious about being not serious. I love this. I'm going to use this to rediscover the seriousness of play.
Yeah.
That That's beautiful.
Yeah.
What do you worry about when you go to bed at night?
I don't. I think about my projects. I think about what I'm writing. I think about what I'm doing, problems that are creative problems. So I don't mind insomnia. I like
Yeah.
that. I like the hypnagogic state of falling asleep and awakening, the crepuscular feelings. It's where a lot of in that fog and a lot of thought happens that
Yeah.
is interesting. I also like jet lag for the same reason.
Yeah.
It stirs the brain pot in interesting ways. You're up in the middle of the night, some weird time, and ideas are flowing. So
Beautiful.
that little bit of disturbance it's like a drug experience in a completely non-addictive fashion. I tend to wake up sometimes in the middle of the night, the way in the 18th century it was fashionable to do. So, 3 a.m., you wake up, you have some dystopian thoughts. That's where the horrors come in, 3 a.m. It's what the biologists call a circadian low.
Yeah.
Uh, and so, yeah, that's when the horribles happen. So I, first of all, understand that the strange thing is they're true. But if I go back to sleep and wake up in the morning, I think, oh, great, a new day. That's the only strange part. But at 3 a.m., if I start awake from a bad dream, I'll go pee and come back, and then I'll start to do something. If I know, I'll do some writing, reading, something like that. And then I'll go back to sleep and I'll feel good about the whole experience. So I've learned not to fight these things.
Yeah.
I do worry about, obviously most people's anxieties are misdirected to petty things when what they're really worried about is the fact that everybody dies and, of course, climate change and global disaster. That's
Yeah.
what they're worried about. I don't care which side of the political spectrum they're on. That's everybody understands we're in deep shit.
Yeah.
And the way it expresses itself is very different. Some people are climate deniers because of it.
Yep.
Other people are saying, my God, we've got to do something because of it. But the fear is the same and it's real. So, it used to be the garden variety stuff like nuclear annihilation, but we got that too. So that's the stuff to worry about, man. But what can you do? You have to, you, my version is that the worst truth is better than the best lie.
Yeah. Can you forget to die?
Well, if you're Alzheimer's, I'm sure you do.
Yep.
An advantage, I suppose.
Yeah.
Um, well, death is one of those things that is, you know, sometimes it's nonsense. Every time I go to sleep, I don't know if I'm going to wake up. And every time I wake up, I'm born again. It's a miracle. On the other hand, it's terrifying. And for me, it's terrifying. I think it's, just the whole idea of non-existence is really hard to get your mind around and say, yeah, that's fine. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because every moment of every day, we're either enjoying or suffering in some, you know, uh, strong way. Um, and that's what life is. There's a life force. You see it in the other animals. They don't want to die.
Yeah.
So that's fine. It's part of it. We are sentient mortals. That's our problem.
Yeah.
That's our
Yeah.
problem. And that's why we have such a hard time.
Yeah.
Really big one. So I don't dismiss people who have fantastic ideas about afterlives and stuff. I understand, whatever helps them get through the day.
Yep.
Said for me, the worst truth is better than the best lie. So I don't go for that. But I understand it. I completely understand it.
Yep.
I don't poo-poo it.
McLuhan learned from Ezra Pound, the poet, that artists are the antenna of the race. They're broadcasting and detecting the hidden psychic effects of our inventions. So we might be able to cope with what we don't like about the inventions. So, Peter, I asked you the question Marshall probed his whole career. Why do we ignore the hidden psychic effects of our inventions, even though the artists are broadcasting them to us?
Well, I used to poo-poo some of this stuff, but I agree now with that description that artists are canaries in the coal mine kind of people. They're saying, wait a minute, what's this all? What is this? What are we doing?
Yeah.
in a way that um, cuts through, some of the other intellectual type people, the philosophers or the critics, they don't get it quite as well as the artists tend to do. I don't like political art, but I do like spiritual critique of the aesthetics of living. For me, aesthetics and ethics, they only differ for what is it, a letter or two? You know, how does it
Mm.
feel? How does it feel to the person? Does it really invigorate them or is it stultifying them? And why people don't get that message is what you're asking, is because of fashion, because of
Yeah.
imitative behavior, what everybody else is doing and telling them it's the next greatest thing. But one of the advantages of being around for a while and doing a lot of reading is the next greatest thing has been around for a while. Remember when reading came out, people thought it would save humanity. And then when the printing press came out, it was huge. Then it was next thing it was the radio was going to save humanity. Then it was TV was going to save humanity, and films were going to save humanity. Now it's the internet's going to save humanity and make us better people and teach everybody stuff. Come on. Yeah.
Really, really good, Peter. Do artists have moral obligation?
Yeah, I do. There's this thing that keeps coming up for a very good reason. Can a bad person make great art?
Yeah.
And I would say they can make good art, but it could be better. It could definitely be better.
Yeah.
There's nothing, it's the wrong question. So take a guy like Ferdinand Céline, the great sort of nihilistic writer, a great writer. You're entering a mind that just sees and writes things a certain way. He was also a not a good person in many ways. He could have been a
Yeah.
better, he could have been a greater writer. So it
Yeah.
matters. It matters. Just because someone does something good, even though they're a bad person, does not mean it couldn't have been better because they were a good person. It could have been.
It's a really good point. Amazing. I've never heard of that worded that way, and it helps broaden my scope there. Thank you. Answer you more ideas or more afraid of old ideas?
I'm sorry, I missed one word due to connection.
Are you more afraid of new ideas or more afraid of old ideas?
Um, I was teaching at a university and they were coming up with new mission statements to the right and to the left of us. And more the the mission statements were just novophilic. Anything new was great. You had to say we were innovative. We had to say we were cross-discipline. Um, and meanwhile, I'd be sitting at around these tables, and there would be the historian, chair of history, sitting over there, saying nothing, signing off on all this crap. Now, the only thing everybody hates is the present.
Yeah.
So you got your futurists who think that it's tomorrow's going to be great, and then you've got your historical reenactors who say the past was really great. I love the one about no true historian would want to live in any previous time.
Wow.
But we all hate the present. You know that much is agreed upon.
That is good. There's a lot there. It evokes Wyndham Lewis says, the artists live in the present and write a detailed history of the future.
Okay.
Yeah. So
So I know though, when you do, you can't. There's a lot of revisionism in people's minds. You
yeah.
know, if you're a critic or a writer, there's nothing sweeter than taking down Abraham Lincoln and saying he really didn't know what he was talking about. He was he was a supremacist or something. But these people they don't see that 50 years from now, people will be looking back at us and saying, what were they not doing?
Yeah.
And I come up with some very clear answers on that. For example, we're wiping out most of the other animal species on the planet, and we're just going along like that's great. So this kind of revisionist thing about how the past is bad, we are trying to take down the most forward-looking people of the past and saying, "Oh, it's because they're not woke like
Yeah.
today." And that is a crime. That is a
Yeah.
deep crime, because these people that are being revised were much more forward-looking than their critics are today.
Yeah.
Their critics are just trying to get ahead in their career by taking down these sacred cows, but
Yeah.
it's much more complicated and nuanced than that. You don't go after helpless people for your own gain.
Yeah. Yeah. Paul Kresner says, I make hamburgers out of sacred cows. Can you conjure up your earliest memory ever or one of them?
My earliest memory that I think I understand is when my sister Anna was brought home from the hospital because I must have been 4, which is about as far back as people can reliably
Yeah.
go. And there had been a lot of talk about this child that was coming because my mother had this big belly and we would hold our hands on it. You could feel it in there. Well, it's coming. We didn't know the gender. It's coming, it's coming, it's coming. So finally, when it was brought into the house, and of course, mom was gone for a couple of days, it was exciting. I remember looking in the bassinet and saying, that's what all the fuss is about, you know?
Dang. Is memory more a curse or more a blessing?
um, you know, maybe you've had the experience of discovering that a lot of your memories weren't what was really going on.
Yeah.
You find out later in life that, you know, you read somebody's letters or something and say, my God, I had no idea. So that happened to me in a profound way. And so is memory a curse or blessing? You realize it's what we have. It's
Yeah.
very important. It is a treasure store. So when you see that, oh, my treasure was false in some
Yeah.
way, that's very disorienting, but it does teach you that memories really are a construction of ourselves as we go, which is, again, people might think of that in a negative way. Oh, he's an old man with his memories. But no, it's a very interesting process and a very informative one, and not to be scorned.
Yep. Peter, tell me someone within your immediate family and then outside your immediate family, just briefly, who had an impact on you, kind of like a role model, and what specifically was that impact?
Well, I was fortunate to have a mentor, which is not something I thought I was looking for, but it did happen. And he was a musician. He was my teacher for, formally. Well, when I first met him, I was playing guitar, mostly self-taught, and he was teaching a guitar class in classical guitar. And I took his class. I was just one of, 30 people in the class. So I learned from him in that way. And then later I studied with him, in my first formal music studies for about 5 years. And then after that, he was very old school. And so he was still deeply involved as a role model with all of his former students. And that went on until he taught his own death at age 85. And he was very much a didactic experience, the way he taught how to die. So he taught, and he himself was very anti-establishment, anti-institutional. Um, was kind of a shit disturber. He wasn't happy unless he was ruffling feathers and showing a better way. But he had deep feelings about the nature of musical expression and the arts that were what I had been looking for because the arts were not were practiced in my family, but no, there was not much discussion of them. And there was not much of an art. There were fine pianists, people who would have liked to do music, but instead they were doctors, like this kind of person. But the missing thing was that they lacked a certain artistic sensibility. They played beautifully, but they didn't. It was mainly a kind of musician's music narrowness. They didn't understand process in the arts. They didn't understand how to be an artist. It was considered, well, it's just a hobby. It's nothing serious. So that's what I got from him, was that whole world.
What was his name?
His name was Theodore Norman. And he started the guitar program at UCLA where I teach.
Yeah. That was really good. I love how you described that. How about within your immediate family? Same question.
Well, my family is becoming clearer to me over time as somewhat eccentric, but in different ways. So there's a lot of, autism tinges in my family, and sometimes more severe than others. So a lot of interesting oddballs. My deepest connection was with the sister that I looked at and said, "What? That's all the fuss about." Regrettably, she was troubled her whole life with being able to be on this planet, and finally took her exit when she was 33 after much suffering. My older brother is a kind of Zen monk brain scientist, and he's been a profound influence on me. Although at a certain point in my trajectory, I realized I couldn't use him as a role model because he was too radically, starving in the streets or whatever he was up to at the time. But he's a really profound thinker and feeler and sufferer, basically. That's part of his eloquence. So he's been a huge influence on me. And
That was good description. And I mean, unless you want to go on, that was enough for now. Did your parents raise you a particular religion?
Well, on my father's side, his grandfather was a Methodist minister.
Yeah.
And my father at age 12 gathered the family and said, I leave the church. And he said that the Apostles' Creed was just not for him. So he turned his back on it. On my mother's side, it was atheists going back to Jesus.
Do you pray?
I've tried it now and then, mainly at my Zen monk brother's instigation. And I respect the practice a lot. And again, with his guidance. So I think it's an important avenue for people. I'm a person of very goodwill, and I do a lot with the people I'm around in terms of helping them and dealing with what might be going on in them. So I have this side. It's not, but I don't send it usually as thoughts to the heavens. But I'm not against that idea.
Yeah. If God does exist, what would you like God to say to you after you die?
Well, I used to think that since we have questioning minds, it means that God does exist, but she respects only atheists. But what would I say? So God would be asking me, what would I like him to say?
Yeah.
Sit down and shut up and listen.
Never had that answer. Thank you. That was good. Do evil people exist, or does evil use people as a vehicle?
It's a useful idea, evil. You know, there are, we were talking about morals earlier,
Yeah.
and they exist. It's not hokum. And again, these are continua and there are flavors to it. But
Yeah.
there are things that you can do that are inexcusable, incomprehensible, really, really bad. And what we should do with such a person is, you know, that's a whole nother can of worms. But there are people back in history where, one would say, if I had the opportunity and I were there and I had a gun, I would simplify things. But that's knowing what we know now. It's where personal responsibility for what clearly is a psychopathology comes in is anybody's guess. But at a certain level, does it matter?
Yeah. Well, you anticipate the next question beautifully. How do you advise someone to deal with an enemy? But first, few modern thinkers, Alan Watts says, if you acknowledge your enemy, you empower them. Coppola said, he stole it from the mob and the samurai. Keep your friends close and your enemies closer. JFK said, forgive your enemy, but don't forget their name. And Fellini says, I need an enemy. So it's a lot of thoughts. A basic question is, how do you, Peter, advise someone to deal with an enemy? But first, how would you respond to Alan Watts? If you acknowledge your enemy, you empower them.
Right. This is, I've been thinking a lot about forgiveness, and people, well, there's acceptance, there's forgiveness, and people have different, the normal thing to say is, if you don't forgive, then you hold within you a bitterness that you have to live with. So that's what he means. If you call it your enemy, you have to hold it within yourself. You empower them to make your life difficult.
Yeah.
There's a lot of truth in that. I do know that there are things that have been done to me that I think of as unforgivable because I've tried. I'm not sure that that path is the only thing. Like I could just say, forget about it, But if it's someone you're still working with, still living with, going on with, then it becomes harder to say, well, wasn't anything. So it was something. How do you deal with it? You can look up forgiveness up and down the centuries. In answers to, you can look at the Buddhists, you can look at anybody. You look at the Sermon on the Mount, an impossible standard. Everybody knows it. But you won't get an answer to how to deal with the difference between acceptance and forgiveness.
Yeah. Yeah. Twain says, forgiveness is the smell the flower puts out after the foot steps on it.
He's one of my heroes, I have to say.
It's a good one.
Yeah.
James Joyce was the first projectionist in Dublin 100 years ago. He basically checked out. He said, this is stupid. Why should I go inside a building and see a movie of a tree when I can go outside and see a real tree? Years later, Faulkner said, sometimes the best fiction is more true than journalism. Why do we have to recreate things in order to get them? Why do we have to go to a theatrical play of people acting out life? Why don't we just live life?
Well, this idea of simulacra interests me a great deal.
Yeah.
Ever since Lascaux caves or the Venus of Willendorf, we've been making these imitations
Yeah.
of what we see around us. And we talked earlier about the different technologies that we've invented, like words and writing and movies and radio and TV and 3D printers. And so, and now we're at the stage where with artificial intelligence that everybody thinks is going to be wonderful, where we can't tell the difference almost anymore between the simulated and the real. That's because we're looking at screens all the time. How could you tell the difference? But, that's why it's not at all surprising that in the political arena, truth itself should be simulated. It's just the completion of the scheme. And
Yeah.
at some point, we're going to reach the apotheosis of everything completely simulated. And people talk about that. Are we really living in a simulation? The question is, what would happen then? The big orgasm, man, we're here. So it's really weird. And it does suggest that contact with reality directly without an intermediating element is really refreshing to the mind. Go out and, chop some wood. On the other hand, James Joyce left the movie theater and wrote, which is a simulation.
Hello.
Yep.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
correct.
So anyway, that's because he was trying to describe thoughts, which can't be seen from the outside.
Well, you said the word truth. Louis Buñuel says, I'm for anyone who seeks the truth, but I part ways when they claim they found it. So most people hear that and they go, that's right. And then one guy said, that's bullshit. If I'm going to seek something, it's because I want to find it. So why do the cliche goes, the journey's more important than the destination? Why do we have to seek or name a destination if the journey's more important?
Well, I was just reading about someone who said in the Robespierre from the French Revolution, he'll go far because he believes what he says.
Yeah.
So, if you don't adjust what you're thinking, what you're believing, what you're seeking as you go, I think that you're not really getting it. Why do we do that? Because people say it's the journey, and I guess that's true. I sat down one day and I said to myself, okay, I'm a musician. We're always seeking something. What is it? We're always a little dissatisfied. But why are we not there? What is it we want? And so I made a list. I said, this is in descending order. We want something that's life-changing, that makes us glad to be alive.
Yeah.
This next one's hard. Proud to be human. Memorable and absorbing.
Yeah.
Now, the point is, you can't get there at any given time in playing music in the moment, but you can always move towards it.
Yeah.
You're always moving towards it. And if it happens, fine. So this person says, I want to get it. Fine. You don't control that. All you control is moving in the direction of that.
Yeah.
And that turns out most musicians aren't doing.
Yeah.
So it's easier to be, when they are, but you can be comfortable and confident if you feel, I'm just moving in that direction.
Yeah. It's Sonny Rollins finished the concert and he'd go backstage and keep playing. And the guys in his band would go, dude, we're done. He goes, I'm still trying to work it out.
These people who have a certain way of being and working like him, it adds up like any practice over time. It's huge.
It's huge.
By the way, with musicians, you almost always, we're content with pretty sounds.
Yeah.
When you experience a musician who has this feel, and they can sometimes be very young, that they're seeking something, and that's what they do every time they practice. They're practicing seeking something. That's different, and you notice it.
Yep. Seeking. I like that word. And so this is Nassim Taleb. Games were created to give non-heroes the illusion of winning. In real life, we don't know who wins or loses, but we know who a hero is. Someone said, oh, okay, well, villains don't think they are bad. They want control. Heroes want freedom. It reminded me of Bateson saying, when the criminal gets caught, does he go, oh, my criminal skills weren't up to snuff that day? Or does he go, oh, I did something morally or socially wrong? So any thoughts on these prompts? But mainly the question is, does punishment work?
Well, apropos the games, I told you I have an inborn aphasia where I just don't do games. I don't like them.
Yeah.
And I don't like them partly because somebody loses. I'm an underdog kind of guy. I
Yeah.
look at the person who's upset and I say, "What was that about?" That's not necessary. Um, does punishment help? I think the criminals generally have the first reaction. I should have been able to get away with it. Um, and does punishment help? Um, I've heard people say that in certain situations they felt they deserved more punishment than they got, which is an interesting idea. So they thought it was somehow expiating or helpful. Um,
Hmm.
Clearly, punishment has something to do at its best, which I don't think it ever is at its best, with making everybody else feel better about something they call justice. It's a difficult one. What do you do when someone uh, does something wrong? With children, children put out an aura of wanting to be told what to do and have limits. If you see that you don't give them that, it doesn't work so well. So there's a certain healthy way to provide limits and curbs. How that translates to grown-ups, good question. Certainly, here's a thought experiment. If everybody got what they wanted all the time, how well would that turn out for
Yeah.
them? It doesn't turn out well.
No.
Everybody needs some kind of struggle, some kind of limit, some kind of correction, you know.
Very good. Peter, to walk us through just briefly the tipping points in you pursuing. I mean, mainly you could do educator, teacher, but mainly what was the tipping point to pursue guitar as your calling and filmmaking as your calling? What are you seeing or experiencing before then, live or on tape? And then where will you go? I want to do that.
Well, let's take guitar first. Like anybody else growing up in the 60s, I was attracted to the guitar. And as an instrument, most of my people in my family played the piano, for which I had no. I play it, I use it, as a tool, but no real feel for it. But with wind instruments like recorders or the guitar or the bowed guitar, the mechanics of it fits me. So as an instrument, it did. Um, but my problem was what I'm interested in general is doing the undone, what isn't being done. And
Yeah.
if you want to be a classical guitarist, well, that's not a very good approach. So, so I've been running a classical guitar program and teaching that when basically doing standard mainstream things is not really what I'm interested in. So when it comes to filmmaking, I find audio visual media intrinsically hypnotizing. I I don't like certain aspects about them. Same way James Joyce did not. And his movies probably had no sound. But when you have a 2-year-old and they sit them down in front of a screen and a movie goes on and you look at their facial expression, you say, not for me.
Yeah.
Mask of hypnosis comes down. It's deeply disturbing. So you say, no more screen time for you, sister. So I don't like the audio visual medium in this one way. That said, I've seen certain movies that were really exciting for me by Fellini or people like that.
Yeah.
Uh, so what I've when I've gone to audio visual, it's to do something that I feel it has not been done, or to make a record of something that was a live performance. So by what I mean by something not being done, um, in my DVD opera, The Mother Lode, the idea was, okay, what if we had uh, images from the 1880s hard rock mining come to life and sing, these historical images. So that was that idea. I hadn't really seen something like that before. And when I did a piece called The Egg and the Seed, it was 275 collages, like a graphic novel. So the idea was, what if you took a graphic novel and instead of having text blocks and word balloons, those were sung?
Wow.
So it's still images, not moving images, but just like a graphic novel, each one beautifully composed and moving through a narrative, but the characters would be sung into musical accompaniment, and same with the text blocks. So I hadn't seen that before. I did it. I thought it was really pretty cool. It wasn't really audio visual. It wasn't a motion picture. Originally a visual, the best version of it. I'm actually shooting slides live against the
Yeah.
music because they look so great. I haven't been able to make them look nearly that great with digital. But anyway, so that's what I mean by trying to do the undone. If it's something that I'm waiting around to see and it isn't happening, then I say, oh God, I guess I got to do this. I got to stop practicing guitar and do this crazy thing. So, and those, I think most creative people mentioned that when they decided to do something that they thought that people thought was weird or there was no reason to do it, that the good things happen.
Yeah. Doing the undone, great 3 words. I know evokes what Bruce Conner, one of my heroes in the experimental film world, exactly said, but not in those words. But there's a thing McLuhan says, everything we invent extends some human sensorium or humanness. Knife and fork extend our teeth. Clothing extends our skin. The shutter in a camera or projector's extension of our eyelid. Even non-tangible religion or maybe philosophy extends consciousness. What does the 2 items, the guitar and the moving image camera, extend for you? What humanness?
Well, with the guitar and performing as a musician from within the music, it does that integrative aspect that I was referring to earlier. It gives a chance to bring into play all aspects of being simultaneously. So that's the kinesthetic, the spiritual, the auditory, the visual, the feel emotional, everything at once. So it has that. It's a tool for integrating and also for sharing with other people. So that's what that's for. The idea of a camera as an instrument projecting the mind and the eye. A lot of that has to do with framing, the way it frames. Now that's very interesting to me because when you just look around, you're framing all the time, but
Yeah.
there's no camera that can quite reproduce that.
Yeah.
It's because you'll see everything, but there's kind of a telephoto where your attention is. Everything else is a different lens. So, but the way frames are composed is very interesting to me visually. But again, and then by the way, with motion, when I did get in, I was upset by the fact that I didn't like audio visual that much. So I decided, what if I just imagined the film opening to my Motherlode piece as a piece of music. So there was some panning camera and some cuts and stuff. And I just started constructing in my mind how to assemble this visual motion as though it were a musical narrative unfolding in time. And I know from composing that that's a very intricate process. I mean, to come up with a minute of good music might take you many, many hours. So I used that. I did that. And I worked at it and I cut it and played it. And I said, yeah, that really works. But I realized how intense that was. And to make an hour movie with that degree of visual controlled flow and expression would be extremely time consuming. It was already overwhelmingly time consuming. So the first 2 minutes, yes. The rest of it, I just, was more loose. But so that just occurred to me as a connection between the music and the visual. But otherwise, a lot of my visual stuff is I like things to sit stiller than most do.
Peter, how did you form your framing aesthetic. I mean the actual, how you set up the
I don't
ratio.
I don't know. I've always been very attracted to that from the painters,
Yeah,
like Matisse,
yeah,
some of the other painters. Just
yeah.
the power of the frame is really always spoken to me. I'm deeply affected by the visual arts. I do a lot of visual art, usually associated with other projects, but not always. But the good painters, the ones which all I mean by that is the ones I like, but I could talk about why I think they're good, um, really make an impression on me from a very young age.
Yeah. So let's go into music for a second. Copeland says the four ingredients of music are melody, harmony, rhythm, and tone color. How do you navigate, combine, orchestrate? Do you have priorities when you're composing a piece of music? How do you work those four elements together?
With difficulty.
Do you find yourself like routine ritually going, you have this part, this element going first or that, or
Yeah, okay. So this order of construction is really a big deal. And I grew up in a time where, modern music was pretty free from any kind of connection with the quotidian experience of seeing a tree and painting a tree. The idea was from painting. Suddenly, why should we paint a tree? We're just gonna do paint. We're gonna
yeah,
do the thing. And so in music, it was the same. We're not gonna sing a song. We're not gonna make a dance. We're just gonna do the sounds. So that was difficult for me. I'm not intrinsically a tone texture kind of person. I could do it, but it took a long time for me to realize that that's what everybody was doing. It was getting kind of amorphous. And what I needed to do in terms of doing the undone was to go back to kind of a meat and speech kind of thing where I would pound out words and gestures based on the body. So it became more and more uh, actually like what Tom Waits said, which is the music, the words are the music.
yeah,
So I became more and more, not because I wanted to, I kind of felt guilty about it, but became more and more working from text. Sometimes I would work from text and throw the words away, but I would use text as a way of making it human. So I would get back into such antiquated notions as phrase, breath, and speech rhythm. So I might, in that case, in terms of order of events, I might start with text, work towards rhythm, then melody, then harmonize. But after a while, when I was doing a larger piece, for example, an opera kind of piece, I realized, well, that's not good. That approach is not going to work for the whole piece. So I would do the antithesis. I would say, no, I'm going to start not with melody. I'm going to start with harmony. And then that would be enough, to have a yin and a yang would be enough to do. So I don't know if that gives you some idea.
no, that was good. My friend also says the three T's in music are taste, theory, and technique. You've learned the technique, you know the theory. How does one acquire taste?
Well, people say, it's easy to compose. You just got to know when to change. But even that gets interesting because what's the difference between boredom and meditation? You just keep going.
Yeah,
So it is a strange thing. But this is not quite the answer to the question, but it just pops into my head because it has to do also with painting, which is, you can be listening to the radio and God bless its heart, KPFK has the 5% that I find valuable. I'll be driving along and I'll turn it on and I'll say, wow, it sounds like Stravinsky. It's pretty cool, but I haven't heard it before. Pretty good. And then after 10 seconds, I say, no, I'm not so sure. And then after 15, no, it's Martineau. And that's because Martineau's detail It doesn't matter when I came in. For 10, 12 seconds, it's great. But formally, it doesn't hold the attention. So this idea that something operates at all levels of scale and is absorbing at every level of scale is very rare. It's true in painting. Does it look good from across the room? Does it look good as you approach? Does it look good when it's 6 inches away? So I was taking part in a performance of all music of Ginastera. And I was not a huge fan of Ginastera, having played his music, and found that after a while, I lost interest in practicing it. But I said, okay, and I played the guitar sonata because I knew it would be a big hit because it's constructed that way. And I thought a whole program of his music is going to be really hard to endure, but it wasn't. And what I learned was that he was a really cagey constructor of large scale form. So his guitar sonata was really going to work if you just played all those notes. The problem was each measure was not very interesting. So it was the opposite of the margining. So as a result, that whole concert sounded great. If you didn't have to say as the player, am I interested in this phrase? Am I interested in this chord? Am I interested in this measure? The answer to that was no. That's why it was hard to practice. But it is, but as a performance, it was more like a dance or something, But musically, note against note, the intricacies of it that say Stravinsky's a wizard at this. These are mysteries. They're much harder. They're both hard. Both hard.
I want to make sure I'm hearing that word right correctly. You're saying marginal as in margin, margin?
No, Martinu. He's a composer.
No, not the composer. The word you were using. It sounded like marginal.
I don't know.
I thought you were saying marginal. It was marginal, like a margin, margin. I couldn't quite hear. Anyways, I couldn't quite hear the word. I can go back and play.
Yeah, but this concept is simple. It's does something work at multiple levels of scale?
Yeah,
or not, and that's the key.
Well, this is what I thought I heard marginal, meaning we use it in studying Finnegan's Wake by James Joyce as it's a center without margins, or a museum without walls. And like what you were trying to explain, I was like going, no, you can read one line from the Wake anytime, anywhere in the book, or read 5 pages. It doesn't matter where you come in or out. You're engulfed in that experience, and that's why it's not formula. So that's why it can work for some, and others will go, this is gobbledygook.
Yeah, and there's different ways of achieving that numinous state. That's interesting.
Luminous state, yeah.
So of getting you absorbed and keeping you absorbed.
Yeah.
So there's a kind of music that is continually evolving, and Joyce may be kind of that way in that book, where it doesn't have form in the usual sense. It just slowly evolves and takes you places, and before you know it, you're somewhere totally different.
It's language about language, So this is interesting because McLuhan used the word taste too in this statement, and I'm really curious your reactions to this statement. Song is slowed down speech. The reason cultures have different musical taste is ultimately connected to language difference. Any comment?
People have talked about this a lot. For example, Italian music throughout the ages is very rhythmically peppy and syllabic because that's the way the Spanish language is, whereas French language is very mysteriously connected and very fluent. And, I think there's something to that.
Peter, tell me an instrumental that makes you laugh.
An instrumental? Well, some of those cartoon musics are that way, aren't they? There's some good stuff back there.
You mean Carl Stalling? Yeah,
for sure. There was something I was hearing just the other day that did make me laugh. You hear it, when you hear it. I wish I could remember. It could have been the Carl Maria von Weber piano sonata that I heard. I had no idea that he wrote these crazy piano sonatas. It might have been that. But yeah, there is wit in music. Not all music, but it's welcome when it's there.
Yep. What's more fundamental, music or language?
Well, music, I guess, because other animals do have it.
Yeah.
So I think it's more fundamental.
Monk says there's no wrong notes. Any comment?
It may have been he who said that, or it may have been Miles that added to it. It depends on what any note can be explained by the one that follows it.
Yeah. But that's right, followed perfectly into Miles. He said he talked about the space between notes. How do you navigate silence dynamics in composing?
See, guitarists tend to not think of silence because they're afraid, especially classical guitarists, because they're afraid that, let me see, I seem to be getting no more of my, there we go. I had my screen was fading away. So guitarists are always afraid that their instrument is going to stop. So they tend to fill up all the sound. But on the other hand, guitar is very good for tiny articulations, like the notes, the spaces between the notes. Sadly, classical guitarists have lately forgotten that, but that's not at all true of the jazzers and the rockers. They're really into controlling the back end of the note.
Yeah.
And the instrument's really good at that. So basically, I spent the last 10 years of my life just trying to get classical guitarists to pay attention, but they don't. They just play a note, let it ring, and then play the next one. So that kind of silence is key to making an absorbing human flow out of a phrase. It's huge. Also, of course, any silence asks the question, what next?
Hello. That's it.
So it's huge.
And as John Cage said, what next? And he goes, that's a very good question. I wouldn't want to ruin it with an answer.
Yep. My only real connection with John Cage was hearing him on the phone when I called up Betty Freeman, she was a philanthropist who supported of all things contemporary music in LA. And for some reason I was calling Betty Freeman to try to get some support for something. And someone answered the phone and I said, "Are you John Cage?" And inimitable voice. It was he.
Beautiful. Yeah, we could go on for Cage forever. My favorite is, this was 20 years ago when DVDs were popular.
Yeah.
There were 8 DVD documentaries you could get on John Cage. I was like, there's got to be something right in the world if there's 8 documentaries on Cage. Then 433 charted on the English pop charts, and it was like, whoa, that's really good.
Well, you mentioned earlier Frank Zappa, and one of the astounding things on YouTube is that both of those people ended up on like the Tonight Show kind of thing on TV back in the early 60s, maybe late 50s. You can see Frank Zappa doing all kinds of cool stuff with found objects, and the same with John Cage.
Oh no, you mean pop
it's a great falling away.
Yeah, it's amazing. Like Al Flipside said, "Don't sell out, sneak in."
Yeah, I don't know how those guys got the gig, but they did something right. Yeah, absolutely.
So Ben Ratliff, the music writer, says, "I mean sound, as it has long functioned among jazz players as a mystical term of art, as in every musician finally needs a sound, a full and sensible embodiment of their artistic personality, such that it can be heard at best in a single note." So me and you could hear Miles and go, "Oh, that's Miles." And Ben would say, "He's fragile and pointed."
Mm-hmm.
Or Coltrane, slightly undercooked or urgent. If a music writer that you highly respect was describing your sound, the Peter Yates sound, in a couple words, which two would you go, he got it?
Um, I would say controlled clarity.
Oh my God, that's pretty good. And they go together. They're not separated with an and.
And also, I'm thinking back to my dismissing myself as not very much a cloud timbrist, but one thing I'm really into, and also are those jazzers, and this doesn't have to do with the single note, although I think Ben Radcliffe is very right about that, has to do with playing in a combo, where
Yeah.
what's really huge for me is blend.
Yeah.
In other words, the function of your instrument with respect to the overall sound.
Yeah.
And that turns out to be a bottomless pit of payoff. It's like infinite giving, free money. And,
Yeah.
and we talked earlier about just moving in the direction of your intent without worrying about getting there. If you're in a combo and you just say, maybe if I play a little softer, we could get a glow on,
Yeah.
do it, and just it happens. It's like free money. And the musicians who think about this are really the ones you want to play with. There was an interview with a guitar player who played with Miles Davis. So he's really nervous. Can you imagine playing with Miles? Someone once said, I was angry. I was Miles Davis angry. Anyway, so after the rehearsals, Miles would come up to him and say, you got to play in the middle of the sound. Got to play in the middle of the sound. And then he would go home. The poor guitarist would go home and lie in bed saying, what does he mean, the middle of the sound? But that's what he was talking about,
Yeah.
finding that blend.
Finding the blends. Beautiful. Yeah, I've seen people back Susie, my wife, do, a Bessie Smith interpreter, and they're trying to show off their blues licks. And
No.
it's like, dude, that's not how you do it. And then Baby Gramps, this guitarist, he backed Susie on a Bessie Smith song. He was invisible. Because when you listen to Bessie or Billy, you don't really hear the musicians.
Mm-hmm.
They're just laying the cloud that she sort of glides on.
Yeah.
And so, yeah.
Yeah, the quickest and easiest demonstration is to accompany a singer. If you're one person accompanying a singer, then this is huge. And you can make that singer feel comfortable, feel beautiful, feel everything. And you have a lot of influence over the whole. It's fascinating. One of my favorite things to do.
Yeah, it's beautiful. What's more important, conviction or compromise?
Well, I've been called uncompromising, but not by my wife. Other musicians, because I'm not interested in the usually, then they call me uncompromising, but that's not really it. I think in working with a combo, it's all about compromise in the sense that I don't think of it as a negative. It's like playing a bad instrument. You don't fight it, you find the voice of that instrument. And
Yeah.
the same is true in a group of people, group of musicians. You have to try to find the voice. Now, if there's someone in the group who's not doing that, it can be disrupting. But if it's musicians who have that approach, it doesn't matter how disparate the instruments are or how skilled the technique of the different players is. What matters is that they're seeking a compromise of sound. Compromise makes it sound like a negative.
Yeah.
But it's not. I just return to the word, you got to find the glow. Find the glow. And it's always there. It doesn't matter who the players are if they have the right attitude.
Yeah.
Then you can get there. Or you can get closer to it.
Yeah. Peter, I asked for 90 minutes. We got about 7 more minutes. Can you go a little longer or you got to go in 7?
Well, whatever's good for you. I don't have any particular obligations tonight. So,
Well, maybe we could go for another 10 or 20 if that's okay.
that's
Just
fine.
give me. Okay. T.S. Eliot said poetry's outing your inner dialogue. What language is your inner dialogue in?
Sometimes it's in complete grammatically correct sentences. When I'm composing a piece of writing, for example, I will tumble it around and groom it. Many of the writers were great, prodigious walkers, people like Charles Dickens. You say, why is a man walking 20 miles a day? It's because he was composing. He's working things out in his head. So some of it is that way.
Yeah.
Other times it's down at the level that everybody experiences of it. We might call intrusive thoughts.
Yeah.
Things that are bothering us, that make us feel bad, that we have to deal with. That's another kind of conversation. And other times it's just feeding off things around.
Yeah.
Whether you're practicing your instrument or walking down the street or whatever it is. Aesthetic is big. Aesthetic. Enjoying and savoring, seeing the big and the small, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Beautiful. That was really comprehensive. And two of my film heroes say, George Manupelli says, ignore yourself. Jonas Mika says, there is no self-expression. And Cecil Taylor says, I'm just a vehicle and this stuff just comes through me. I know it's a stupid question. It's both, but just a prompt. Is art making, music making more self-expression or more your vehicle for whatever cultures, technologies, and environments are dominant?
Good question. Back to Thelonious, he said, genius is being yourself. So he's going to have to fight it out with some of those others. Expressing yourself has its problems. Like, why does anybody want to listen to somebody blather about, their inner struggles? And, it's like somebody telling you their dreams. Some people can do it, like Franz Kafka, but most people, you just want to glaze over. So I think the answer to that is all I can do is make the performance, make the writing that I would have liked to encounter.
Right. Can art making be egoless?
I think there's a continuum. There is a kind of art that's egoless. We usually call it epic. For example, Homer. You don't think of the guy. You don't think of the inner workings of his mind. It's very impersonal, and that can be very cool. Most sacred art is that way, and I like sacred art. I was celebrated by the International Festival of Sacred Music once, even though I'm one of the most irreverent people, but it happened by hook or by crook, and it was great. I love sacred art because it does ask of the creator to go beyond themselves, to exceed themselves, sometimes to erase themselves. That's very interesting. And you can sometimes get very good results. For example, there's no explanation for why Bach's music is so great, except for three, maybe four. His audiences were himself, his family, other musicians, and God. I say 3.5 because the other musicians in his family were the same thing, but they were all musicians. But there's no, he wrote this to please God as one of his. So that's why he's irritatingly good all the time. He didn't write bad music. So on the other hand, I like ego music. I like ego, especially in writing. I like to feel as if I'm visiting somebody's mind, getting to know them. I find that just as compelling when it's done right. In other words, if it's interesting, if it's an interesting person, and you get to spend some time in her mind, that's great. So it's both are good. And as a matter of fact, it brings to mind my next writing project will be to alternate between these elements as I go, perhaps. That'd be cool.
Yeah. Is perception reality?
Of course not. But it's, to say that it is unconnected or irrelevant to reality would be a grave error if you've ever crossed the street. Yeah, but it is not exactly reality. Interesting thing occurred to me the other day. I've always wondered why other animals within a species are often very interchangeable in appearance and equally beautiful, such as raccoons or geese. Why aren't humans? equally beautiful.
Yeah.
Wouldn't it be easier? So then the question comes up, well, maybe the geese are seeing something in each other that we can't see. Well, it might be smell or something. But then I read an article recently about how many of these other animals see in the ultraviolet spectrum. It's not just bees. It's a lot of animals across divides, mammalian, birds. They see stuff we don't see.
Yeah.
Maybe they're seeing all these differences. I don't know, but a thought occurred to me.
Yeah.
So perception is not reality for that very reason, because we only see a narrow part of the spectrum. And other animals are doing things like detecting the magnetic field of the earth.
Yeah. Yeah. Lily Tomlin says reality is just a collective hunch. So,
Yeah, no, that we're absolutely.
yeah,
That's, basically when it comes to epistemology, we're always just placing bets. What I say is, people say, anything's possible. And I say, yeah, anything's possible. It's just not very likely.
likely. Yeah. So tell me one, please. Tell me one major element that's changed and one major element that stayed the same in the many years you've in your creativeness.
Um, Two things about process. One is I don't ever get blocked. Um, and I think that's partly because I work in different realms a lot. So I'll be working, not only if I'm writing, I'll be writing 3 or 4 things at once. If I'm doing music, I'll go and work with a visual component. So I move around a lot, and I figure if somebody else is blocked, it's because they need some fallow time, mull things over. Instead, they sit there saying, oh, woe is me. But if you just move to something else, that's partly because I'm much more of a generalist than some people. That has its pluses and its minuses. But the plus is, if it's refreshing to me to teach instead of perform, to compose instead of teach, to make a painting because that's what I feel like doing, to do a writing project. Yeah, so I'm always moving around, but it's like moving things forward. So that's process. What else has stayed the same? Um, Again, this idea of doing the undone. I'm
Yeah.
not things that I don't see outside. Sometimes I try to give projects away because, I don't have enough time. So I'll try to find someone to, do this so I don't have to do it. But there's a certain kind of impatience. This is a conceit, you understand. Very important for any person is to think that what they're doing is important, even
Yeah.
though, of course, it isn't. And no one needs any of this stuff. And we all die anyway. So keeping that feeling of urgency, feeling of need, feeling of importance is really important to keep that going. And it's
Yep.
not that easy because earlier in your life, just for obvious reasons, you can have transformative, life changing experiences every day when you're 1 year old. But if you had that when you were 60, there'd be something wrong with you, deeply wrong. So, but you have to be much more active about putting in front of yourself something that is fresh, and a lot of that will have to do with reconsidering things you thought you had fully understood or fully fed on, but no, yeah, there's more there.
Moshe Feldenkrais works with healing and movement. He says it's literally possible to identify a weakness and incorporate it to become a strength rather than we're normally taught to overcome a weakness. Tell me a weakness you turned into a strength.
Um, the fact that I got somewhat of a late start in music, even though as a child I was exposed to it. So that changes what's possible. The fact that I was not an eldest child whose mother said I was God, but instead a middle child with a very critical mother. That means I'm not going to be a concerto soloist, and I'm not going to be a conductor. Someone did a study on them and said they're all firstborns whose mothers told them they were God. So these are constraints. They are weaknesses that But what you do is you say, okay, back to Thelonious, genius is being yourself. So what is it that you makes sense to do? Comes there, an answer comes. In music, there's 1,000 ways of being a musician. It's really helpful to be able to cross some of them off the list. So being another thing that might be considered a weakness, I'm a shy person in many ways. I'm quite comfortable speaking in public and teaching and stuff like that. But basically, I don't need a large audience. I'm not like Michael Jackson, who wants the whole world to revere him and killed himself trying to get that back. I realized at a certain point, I'm more like these scientists where all they need is 3 guys to understand what they're talking about and they're fine.
Yeah.
So this earlier you can figure that out for yourself with my students. Some of them want a big audience. I say, okay, well, you better do this. Why? But if you don't need a big audience, there's no point in playing all this mainstream stuff. If all you need is a few people to understand you, you might as well just form a group and do your thing and they understand your music and get on with your life.
Yeah.
So that's what it's figuring out how to position yourself in terms of what to do. That would be the strength to come out of the weakness.
Yeah. In fact, that's funny because I forgot on the intention article question, I left out the follow-up, which is Duchamp said there's no art without an audience. And I usually say, how much do you think of your audience when you're composing your piece of music?
Well, as I mentioned before, that's an act of faith.
Yeah.
In music, when I went to concerts when I was younger, 1 in 100, maybe, that's very generous, would change my life at a young age, and maybe it's not generous. And did I go backstage and tell the person, hey, you just changed my life? No, I went home excited and I practiced or did something. So that person on stage is taking it on faith that somebody's life was changed in that audience. Happened to be me, but I never told them.
Yeah.
Similarly, when I give a performance or make something and give it out there, it's an act of faith. Sometimes, very rarely, someone will come backstage and you get a genuine feeling that this really did matter to them. Usually they come back and they say, great job, and that's nice.
Yeah.
But every now and then that does happen as a direct communication, but very rarely. The rest of it is on faith. As I said, I play the concert that I would have liked to encounter, but that I haven't seen. And I assume that I'm paying it forward and someone is going to get it. Who's that?
Yeah.
Who's that going to be? Very few people, but that's normal.
Yeah.
Andre Segovia used to come to my teacher Ted Norman's house for dinner right after playing at the Dorothy Chandelier Pavilion. 3,000 people there. And he would say, I play for 5.
No. Nicky Slonimsky would say he was running the avant-garde music series for LA, whatever, a Philharmonic.
Yeah.
And there would be 20 old ladies there and 15 of them were sleeping. Yeah, but then Harry Smith said the purpose of cinema is to put you to sleep. So maybe it all worked out well. There's a line, Peter, that goes, you create what you resist. Bob Goldthwait morphed it into you are what you hate. In fact, James Joyce said it's a curious thing how your mind is super saturated with the religion in which you say you disbelieve. Louis Buñuel nailed it. He said, thank God I'm an atheist. So this idea, you create what you resist. Any thoughts on that? And I'm not saying you, Peter, but one creates what one resists. Any thoughts on that idea?
Well, this is a trivial one, but people say, how do you know when the painting's done? Well, when it throws you out. Or another way of putting it, you stop when it ceases to disgust you, But for me, I'm not that, my passions run in a different flavor. It's more like it bugs me until it's right, whatever that is, and then it's done. So there is that tension between what you're getting and what you're after. That is kind of a little bit of a fighting, constructive fighting. I tend to work with confidence in the following way: that whatever I'm working on, I can get it to where it should be in my mind. It could have gone other ways. It's not fixed, but I can get it to a position where it is, to me, sound in some way, meaning integrated, ready to go off. Whether anyone else would get it or think it's worth anything is a different matter. And when I look back at earlier stuff, when people look at their juvenilia, most of them want to burn it, like Brahms burned 2/3 of his music. But we don't know if it wasn't better than his other stuff because people don't always know. There's something I call the Conan Doyle syndrome. Arthur Conan Doyle thought all of his other stuff besides Sherlock Holmes was really great. We disagree.
Yeah.
So he didn't burn Sherlock Holmes, and we're the better for it. So we can't trust Brahms when he burned 2/3 of his stuff.
Yeah.
Kafka wanted Brod to burn all of his stuff, and Brod said, "Sure, I'll do it," and he didn't. So when it comes to juvenilia and stuff that I wrote that I think might be bad, some of it is, but a lot of it I've worked with since and used in various ways. I'm okay with it.
That's cool. How do you find peace of mind?
Between people, depends how much, I've become in relationships much more deeply involved in helping them work if it's ones that there's a reciprocal need for that relationship to be very very integrated, very close. That takes time and effort that in the past I didn't have the time and effort. So I sort of look for the best and hope for the best. So in those areas, I find peace of mind through a lot of interaction. Otherwise, without in the non-people realm, I find peace of mind by acting, by doing projects of all various types.
If you were walking down the street today and you met yourself as a 12-year-old, what would you say to your 12-year-old self?
I would say that's a good question. That's a very good question. It's very individual. It depends on what happened to you in your life. I would say, I have a son who's in his 20s and he's casting about. So I don't give him advice unless he hints. But I do tell him to be as be the way you want people to be, but don't expect that that's the way they're going to be to you.
Yeah, it's good. Peter, these are 5 quick Alan Watts questions off the top of your head in just a few words. Number 1, who started it all?
Well, that would be that person in the cave who said, maybe if I take this club and hit that log, it'd have a good sound.
Nice. Are we going to make it?
Are we going to make it? I would say 20% odds that we do as a species. Something like that.
3, where do we put it?
Well, hopefully in our arms.
Nice. Who's cleaning it up?
Me.
5th one, is it serious?
Yeah. Yep.
Really good. We got a few more and we're out of here. Peter, this has been enlightening. I really appreciate it. Which way should toilet paper come off the roll, over or under?
Well, either way you do it, you have to confront what physicists call jerk dot.
What is that?
Well, you're familiar with speed and you're familiar with acceleration, which is change in rate of speed. But there's such a thing as change in the rate of acceleration, which is change in the rate of speed, the rate of speed. That's called jerk. But in order to pull off a square of toilet paper without unspooling the roll with one hand, you have to adjust the rate of jerk. That's called jerk dot. You have to make a snap of a certain kind. that adjusts the rate of the rate of the rate of the rate of speed.
I love it.
Doesn't matter whether you go over the top or the bottom. By the way, if you take an elevator, the old elevators announced the floor that you're stopping at by a little flip in your stomach. But that went away. But the engineers had to control the motors to the level of jerk dot.
Wow. I've never had that answer, and that's the best answer I ever had in 40 years. You got to see the picture that Brad has of the patent for the toilet paper roll next to his toilet paper.
Okay.
If a publisher was to release your autobiography off the top of your head, what would the title be?
Well, maybe Unsolicited Advice might be a good title. Let's see.
That's
I
good.
wrote a memoir on private teaching of music lessons called Lesson Book. And the idea was so much of my whole life has been these 1 hour glimpses of people,
Yeah.
ordinarily once a week, but then they would appear and they would go away. And it was just like this giant collage, almost like a flip pad,
Yep.
all these pictures of people across time. So that's what that memoir was, called Lesson Book, because this is the way I knew these people, was in this strange, intermittent, flickering method. So that part of my life has that title.
They want to scent the glue in the binding of your autobiography. What smell?
Animal hide. That's an easy one. Those animal hide glues that you get
Yeah.
with the old projector. Whoa. That would be it.
If a statue was built in your honor, where would you want it displayed and what would it be made of?
Well, I already made the statue. It's in my front yard, and it's in my honor only in the sense that it honors all the musicians who have died in plane crashes on the way to the gig.
Wow.
And it's a list, starts in 1950 with Glenn Miller or someone like that, and goes all the way up. I made it just after Aaliyah died in a helicopter crash. So there's about one a year, about 50 of these martyrs. And of course, people are on there like Randy Rhoads. And I thought they needed honoring because
Beautiful.
who's going to take that flight in the storm? It's because the audience is waiting.
Oh my God.
And the shape of it, it has a mosaic pillar, and on these tiles that I cooked in the backyard with the names on it, it's like cuneiform. And then there's a copper pole going up to a burnt propeller.
Wow. I want to see that. That's beautiful. It's really an amazing idea, and you accomplished it.
Well,
Peter,
I wanted to suggest it to the city council to replace this sappy statue they have downtown, but I figured, they're not going to go for it.
tell me something good you never had and you never want.
Luxury.
Luxury is a great answer. Okay, we're 4, and we're out of here. If you were in a vat of vomit up to your neck and someone threw a bag of shit at your face, what would you do?
Well, I would go immediately to the worst case scenario. Like, is this going to kill me? My reaction to that kind of trauma is calm.
Calm, nice.
It's
What's the
I know this is supposed to freak me out, so all I have to do is not freak out, and if there's a way out of this, I'll get it. If not, I'll go peacefully.
Well, it's really Descent in the Maelstrom by Edgar Allan Poe, short story where, that's what the sailor does. He studies the patterns of the broken boat in the whirlpool. Instead of swooping down to his death, he uses them to swoop his way out of death.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What's the cultural shift you see developing today that inspires you?
The fact that even as the number of live performance events is challenged, the number of venues, the cost of doing it, the more each one of them is that much more important.
Yes. It's good. Thornton Wilder said in 1928, art is confession. Art is the secret told, but art is not only the desire to tell one's secret, it's the desire to tell it and hide it at the same time. Peter, you've laid your cards on the table for over 90 minutes. I'm not insinuating you haven't already answered this. What's it really all about for you?
A combination of what Thelonious said and what I was talking about at the beginning, which is what do you do with your spare time?
Yeah.
That is your art.
Yeah.
Everybody has spare time unless, there's a reason for that. If you think about evolution and the
Yeah.
way which animals have to provide for themselves, you realize there has to be surplus or they wouldn't be here because some years come along where you need surplus, but that's rare. Most of the time you don't need that. So every animal has spare time. What do they do with it? And the answer is the other animals are very unself-conscious about it. They just express themselves as those beings. So Thelonious said, genius is being yourself. And the animals tell us, express your species. What does it mean to be human?
Yeah.
What does that mean to you? I think it's an error to be a consumer as an answer to that question, but that's my opinion. A lot of people do it. They go to the grave just consuming things, consuming culture, consuming movies, consuming goods. That doesn't seem to me an expression of what it means to be a human being.
Yeah.
In the usage of time. That's my opinion.
Yeah.
If they asked me, I would tell them. So that's my answer, to use my spare time to express, first of all, what Thelonious was saying, being myself, and second, what does it mean to be a human being?
Yeah. It's amazing. One of my favorite artists here in Venice, Duggo, he said, Charlie Parker Thelonious Monk heard all the notes Charlie Parker heard, but only decided to play some of them.
Yeah, this is a thing. Some people play more notes. I mean, Count Basie was notorious.
Oh, that's another one. Yeah.
So, but then meanwhile, you've got other people like Art
Yeah.
Tate, I can't play anything except 1,000 notes.
Yep.
But then you've got people, mainly in classical music, who get interested in both. So, for example, The Rite of Spring, compared to the 8 pieces for 5 fingers by Stravinsky, he explored both.
Yeah. What gives you the most optimism?
Aesthetic appreciation of the moment and the world. I mean, the one thing that doesn't diminish, but instead increases in intensity, is the beauty of natural forms, both animate and inanimate. The wonder that it all exists on this blue dot in the universe, it's just mind-boggling.
Yeah.
So there's no excuse for thinking that life is a sucked orange. It's quite the reverse. It's a bottomless pit of orange juice.
It is.
Bottomless pitcher, I should say. Bottomless pit sounds like an Edgar Allan Poe.
Yeah. It's a bottomless pitcher and a picture. So
yeah.
a lot going on here. It's been amazing, Peter. I interviewed a scientist musician yesterday, and boy, what he said and what you said is like resonating deeply. I would love to do a salon with both of you someday in the future and get into all this a lot deeper. But I want to tell you the first question is, what's the best thing for a human being? And Wilhelm Reich said the best thing for a human being is another human being.
Yeah, that's a good one.
And the last question, what gives you the most optimism, is what they asked Groucho Marx at the end of his life, and he said other people.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's truly been a pleasure sharing this time with another person, especially you, Peter. Really appreciate your time and energy. It's truly been enlightening for me. And I know it will keep resonating, all these things you've told me. Thank you so much.
It's been my pleasure, and I appreciate and am impressed by your mission here. Thanks.
Thank you, Peter. And even though I'm going to hit the end broadcast button, I hope this never ends and we can keep talking forever and ever.